A brave hunter ventured deep into the heart of a forbidden West African forest, searching for game to feed his village. Instead, Ethan stumbled upon a mysterious, unconscious woman lying beneath the ancient trees. Her beauty was otherworldly, but something about her felt unnatural. He couldn't have known that saving her would awaken the wrath of the gods and lead him into a battle for his very soul. What unfolded next would uncover sacred secrets of the forest, set the hunter against vengeful deities, and turn the life of the serpent spirit, Lila, upside down. They thought they could manipulate him into their web of divine justice, but Ethan's courage and Lila's heart would spark an unexpected rebellion. This is the story of how a hunter and a serpent defied the gods themselves, and how the love they discovered threatened to destroy them both. But before we dive into their epic tale, where are you watching from? And if you love thrilling African folktales, hit that like button and subscribe. There's so much more magic and mystery waiting for you. Ethan crouched low, hidden behind a cluster of bushes. His bow was drawn, an arrow aimed at the mighty antelope grazing nearby. The forest was alive with soft whispers of wind rustling through the leaves, birds singing in distant trees, and the faint hum of insects. This was Ethan's world, a place of shadows and survival. As he prepared to release the arrow, a sudden cry pierced the air. It wasn't an animal sound, it was human, soft yet full of pain. Startled, Ethan lowered his bow. The antelope bolted, vanishing into the dense foliage. Ethan hesitated. The cry came again, faint but unmistakable. He slung his bow over his shoulder and followed the sound, his senses sharp. The forest grew denser as he moved, the trees twisting into strange shapes. The air smelled damp and earthy, carrying a faint metallic tang. Then he saw her. Lying on the forest floor, partially covered in leaves, was a woman. Her skin was as smooth as polished ebony, and her long, braided hair fanned out around her like a dark halo. She wore a simple dress, torn and dirted, and her bare feet were scratched and bleeding. Ethan's heart pounded. He had never seen a woman like her before. Her beauty was ethereal, almost unnatural. For a moment, he wondered if she was a forest spirit, one of the beings the village elders often warned about. She groaned softly, her eyes fluttering open. They were a piercing shade of green, like sunlight filtering through the forest canopy. She tried to sit up but collapsed back with a pained moan. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, his voice cautious but gentle. I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm lost." Ethan looked around, his hunter's instincts on high alert. The forest felt different here, heavier, darker, as if it were holding its breath. But he couldn't leave her. His mother had raised him to help those in need, no matter the cost. "Can you walk?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She shook her head weakly. Ethan sighed, slipping his arms beneath her. Her body was cold, and she was as light as a bird. He stood and began the long journey back to the village. As he carried her, the forest seemed to whisper around them, its sounds strange and disjointed. Ethan glanced over his shoulder several times, feeling eyes on him, but saw nothing. When he reached the village, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows over the huts. The villagers gathered as he approached, their faces a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "Who is she?" asked old Amina, the village healer, her voice sharp. "I found her in the forest," Ethan replied, carefully laying the woman down on a mat outside his hut. "She's injured and lost." Amina frowned, her weathered face tightening. "Strangers found in the forest often bring trouble. You should have left her there." "She's human," Ethan argued. "She needs help." The villagers murmured among themselves, their voices tinged with fear. The forest was sacred and dangerous, a place where spirits roamed and rules were strict. Bringing someone from its depths into the village was unheard of. "I'll take responsibility," Ethan said firmly, silencing the crowd. Reluctantly, they dispersed, leaving Ethan to tend to the stranger. He brought her water and cleaned her wounds, his movements careful and precise. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. "Lila," she said after a pause, as if the name had been plucked from the air. "Well, Lila, you're safe now," Ethan said, though a strange unease curled in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, waiting, just beyond the edge of the firelight. As the night deepened, Ethan sat by Lila's side, unaware of the danger he had brought into his home. Far away in the heart of the forest, unseen eyes glowed in the darkness, and a deep, rumbling voice muttered,
"The hunter has taken the bait."
The village slept in silence, but Ethan lay awake, staring at the roof of his hut. The faint glow of the moon streamed through the thatched gaps, painting the walls in soft silver. His mind buzzed with unease. Lila rested on the mat nearby, her breathing steady. Ethan had moved her inside when the chill of the night crept in, but now he wondered if he had made a mistake. The villagers' warnings rang in his ears.
Strangers found in the forest often bring trouble.
He turned toward her. Even in sleep, she looked otherworldly. Her skin glistened faintly in the moonlight, and her features were so perfect they seemed almost carved. Ethan frowned. No one in the village or surrounding lands looked like her. A sudden sound made him sit up. It was faint, like a whisper carried on the wind. Ethan's heart raced as he strained to listen. "Ethan." The voice was low and eerie, stretching his name in a way that made the hairs on his arms stand. He grabbed his hunting knife and stepped outside. The village was quiet, the huts dark, and the central fire reduced to glowing embers. "Who's there?" Ethan called softly, gripping the knife tightly. The air felt thick, heavy with something unseen. For a moment, he thought he saw movement near the edge of the forest. A shadow, tall and slithering, vanished into the darkness.
"Ethan."
The voice came again, closer this time. Ethan turned sharply, his eyes scanning the surroundings. There was no one. Just the wind brushing through the trees. He shook his head and backed into the hut, barring the door. When he turned, Lila's green eyes were open, staring at him. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice soft but unsettling in the quiet. "I thought I heard something," Ethan replied, lowering his knife. "Probably just the wind." Lila tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "The forest is strange at night. You should be careful." Her words sent a chill through him, though he couldn't say why. "You should rest," Ethan said, forcing his voice to steady. "You'll need your strength." Lila nodded and lay back down, but Ethan noticed the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. The next morning, Ethan awoke to the sound of voices outside. The villagers had gathered, their murmurs rising like a swarm of angry bees. He stepped out, shielding his eyes from the bright sunlight. Old Amina stood at the center of the group, her gnarled hands clutching her staff. "The forest is restless," she declared. "Strange signs have appeared." "What signs?" Ethan asked, frowning. "The animals are acting wild," a young farmer said. "My goats refused to leave their pen this morning, and the chickens are silent." "I saw a shadow in the trees last night," said another. "It moved like a snake but was taller than a man." Ethan's stomach tightened. He thought of the shadow he had seen and the whispers in the night. "It could just be the weather," he suggested. "Storms are coming." "No," Amina said sharply, her eyes narrowing. "This is more than weather. You brought something from the forest, Ethan. Something that doesn't belong here." "She's just a woman," Ethan argued, though doubt crept into his voice. "She's not one of us," Amina replied. "You should send her away before it's too late." Ethan glanced back at his hut. Through the doorway, he saw Lila sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She looked fragile and human, but the villagers' fear was infectious. "I'll keep an eye on her," he said. "If there's any trouble, I'll take responsibility." The villagers muttered but eventually dispersed, though their wary glances lingered on Ethan's hut. Inside, Lila looked up as Ethan entered. "Are they afraid of me?" she asked, her voice tinged with sadness. "They don't trust strangers," Ethan said carefully. "Do you?" Ethan hesitated. Her green eyes bore into him, searching. "I trust my instincts," he said finally. "And they tell me you're not here to harm anyone." Lila smiled faintly. "Your instincts are kind." But as Ethan busied himself with his morning chores, he couldn't shake the feeling that his instincts might be wrong. By midday, the sky darkened unnaturally, casting the village in eerie twilight. Clouds swirled above, their shapes strange and shifting, like watching faces that dissolved before they could be recognized. The villagers stayed indoors, huddled in fear. Ethan tried to focus on his work, sharpening his hunting tools, but his hands were unsteady. Lila sat nearby, silently watching him. "You're afraid," she said. "I'm cautious," Ethan replied, not looking up. "You have reason to be." The bluntness of her words made him pause. He met her gaze, searching for meaning. But before he could speak, a deafening crack of thunder shook the ground, followed by a torrential downpour. Ethan rushed to secure the door, but the wind howled, pushing against the hut as if alive. "This storm isn't natural," Lila said, her voice barely audible over the noise. "What do you mean?" Ethan demanded, turning to her. She hesitated, her expression conflicted. "There are forces in this forest, Ethan. Ancient forces. They don't take kindly to outsiders." "You're talking like an elder," he said, frowning. "What do you know about this storm?" Lila didn't answer. Instead, she stood and moved to the doorway, her eyes fixed on the forest. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked, alarmed. "They're watching," she said softly. "Who?" Before she could answer, another crack of thunder shook the hut. But this time, Ethan heard something else, a deep, guttural growl that didn't belong to the storm. He grabbed his bow and moved to Lila's side. Through the rain, he saw shapes moving in the shadows of the trees. They were large and serpentine, their eyes glowing faintly. "Get inside," he ordered, pulling her back. "It's too late," she whispered. "What's too late?" Ethan demanded, but Lila didn't respond. Instead, she turned to him, her green eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. For the first time, Ethan saw a flicker of something inhuman in her gaze, and his blood ran cold. The storm raged outside, the wind howling like a beast in pain. Ethan stood frozen, his bow trembling in his hand. The shapes in the forest grew clearer, tall, twisting figures moving between the trees. Their forms seemed to shift with the shadows, too fluid to be anything human. "They're coming for us," Lila whispered, her voice almost lost in the fury of the storm. Her body seemed to glow faintly, as if the storm had somehow drawn energy from her. Ethan felt an icy chill run down his spine. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice strained with disbelief. "The spirits of the forest," she said, her gaze distant, as if she were seeing something he couldn't. "They are the guardians of this land." "And she trailed off, and for the first time, Ethan saw hesitation in her eyes. "You're one of them, aren't you?" Ethan demanded, his heart hammering in his chest. "A spirit from the forest." Lila looked at him, her lips parted as though she were about to speak, but no words came. Then, without warning, she stepped toward him, her movements slow and deliberate. The energy around her shifted, the air thickening as if charged with some unseen power. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to move, to run, but his feet were rooted to the ground. "I'm not what you think I am," she finally said, her voice trembling. "But neither am I entirely human. The gods of the forest sent me here to kill you." Ethan felt the earth beneath him tilt, as if the world had shifted in an instant. His heart raced, and his breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean?" he gasped. "You were sent to kill me." Lila nodded, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I was sent to end your life, Ethan. You violated the sacred grounds of the forest when you hunted there. You didn't know, but the deities, they are vengeful. They demand balance, and you tipped it. They chose me to carry out their will." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He staggered back, his mind struggling to process what she had just revealed. The woman he had taken in, nursed back to health, and begun to care for, was not who he thought she was. She was a weapon, sent by the very forces he had unknowingly angered. "You're a serpent," he muttered, his voice hollow. "A snake sent to kill me." Lila's eyes glowed with an eerie light. "Yes, I am a serpent spirit," she said softly. "But I am not like the others. I have feelings. And those feelings are confusing me." She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. I should kill you, but I cannot. I care about you. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The woman he had saved, the woman he had come to trust, was not just any woman at all. She was a being of the forest, bound by the will of ancient and powerful deities. And yet, despite her purpose, despite the darkness that surrounded her, she had formed a bond with him. A loud crash interrupted his thoughts, and both he and Lila turned toward the door. The storm had grown even fiercer, and the ground beneath their feet shook as though the very earth itself was protesting the tension in the air. The shapes in the forest had grown larger, more distinct. The guardians were closing in. They are angry, Lila whispered, her voice trembling with fear. They know I am hesitating. They will punish me for it. You don't have to do this, Ethan said urgently, stepping toward her. You don't have to obey them. You don't have to kill me. I must, she whispered, her voice breaking. If I don't, if I betray them, they will destroy us both. She looked at him, her eyes filled with agony. I don't want to hurt you, but I am bound by their will. If I defy them, the forest will consume us. The ground trembled again, this time much more violently. A deafening roar echoed through the air, shaking the hut's walls. Ethan could feel the pressure building, the weight of something ancient and powerful pushing down on him. Outside, the shapes were no longer just shadows. He could see them now, their forms twisting like serpents, their eyes glowing with a menacing light. The spirits of the forest had arrived. Lila, we can fight them, Ethan said, his voice desperate. Together. If we stand together, we can fight back. Lila shook her head, her long hair whipping around her face as if the wind itself had turned against her. It's too late, she said, her voice thick with sorrow. They are too powerful. They are the heart of the forest. They are the ones who keep the balance. Then I will fight, Ethan said, his resolve hardening. I don't care if they're gods or spirits. I will protect you. Lila's eyes widened in surprise, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she turned toward the door, and Ethan followed her, gripping his bow tightly. The wind howled outside, a deafening roar of rage and power. He stepped into the storm with her, facing the wrath of the forest deities. The moment they stepped outside, the wind hit them like a wall. The storm had grown wild, the rain pounding against them like 1,000 fists. The trees bent and creaked, their branches twisting and writhing like serpents. And there, in the heart of the storm, stood the spirits of the forest. They were monstrous, tall and serpentine, their bodies coiling in the air, their glowing eyes fixed on Ethan and Lila. Their mouths opened, revealing rows of sharp, gleaming teeth. Lila's body shimmered with an eerie light as she stepped forward, her expression one of determination. I will not follow your will, she said, her voice carrying across the storm. I will not kill him. I choose him over you. The forest deities hissed, their voices a cacophony of anger and betrayal. You dare defy us, one of them hissed, its voice like the slithering of 1,000 snakes. You were sent to kill him, Lila. You are ours to command. Ethan stepped forward, his heart racing, but his resolve unshaken. You can't control us, he said, his voice steady. We are free to make our own choices. The ground shook beneath them, and the storm intensified, the winds whipping around them in a frenzy. The spirits of the forest screeched in fury, and for a moment, it seemed as though the entire forest was coming alive, ready to consume them both. But Lila didn't back down. I will protect him, she said firmly, her voice unwavering. No matter the cost. Ethan stood by her side, his bow raised and ready. Together, they would face the wrath of the forest, and together, they would fight for their survival. But little did they know, the true test had only just begun. The storm howled, and the ground trembled as the spirits loomed closer, their serpentine forms twisting through the wind and rain. Their glowing eyes burned with fury, and their voices merged into a deafening roar. Ethan tightened his grip on his bow, his knuckles white. You cannot defy us, Lila, one of the spirits hissed, its voice cold and venomous. Your betrayal will cost you everything. Lila's form flickered, her human shape shimmering as though it were struggling to hold. Her voice, however, was steady. I choose my own path. I will not be your weapon anymore." The spirits screeched in unison, their wrath shaking the air. Suddenly, one of them lunged, its massive, coiled body striking toward Ethan like a flash of lightning. Ethan dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the attack. The spirit's strike left a deep gouge in the earth where he had stood. "Stay behind me," Lila shouted, her voice carrying an authority Ethan had never heard before. "No," Ethan said, scrambling to his feet and knocking an arrow. "We stand together." Lila turned to him, her glowing green eyes filled with a mix of fear and admiration. Before she could respond, another spirit lunged, its jaws wide open. Lila moved with inhuman speed, her form blurring as she intercepted the attack. Her body shimmered, and for a brief moment, Ethan saw her true form, a massive serpent with emerald scales and eyes that burned within her light. She struck the spirit with precision, her fangs sinking into its ethereal flesh. The spirit let out a screech of pain and recoiled, its glowing form dimming. Ethan stared in awe. Lila was a serpent spirit, powerful and terrifying, yet she stood between him and the wrath of the forest. "Ethan," she called, snapping him out of his trance. "The arrows, they are tipped with iron, aren't they?" He nodded, realizing what she meant. Iron was said to weaken spirits, though he had never believed the old tales until now. "Then aim for their eyes," Lila shouted, her voice urgent. Ethan raised his bow, his hunter's instincts taking over. One of the spirits lunged toward him, its glowing maw open wide. He released the arrow, and it flew true, striking the spirit in its eye. The creature let out a horrible screech, its body writhing as it dissolved into mist. But there were more, dozens of them, circling like predators. "You cannot win," the spirits roared in unison. "You defy the gods themselves." Ethan fired another arrow, his aim steady despite the chaos. The arrow struck its target, and another spirit dissolved. Lila moved with serpentine grace, her massive form weaving through the storm as she fought off the spirits. Yet, for every spirit they defeated, more seemed to emerge from the shadows of the forest. "They are endless," Ethan shouted, his voice hoarse. "No," Lila replied, her voice resolute. "Their power comes from the forest itself. If we sever that connection, we can weaken them." "How?" Ethan asked, dodging another attack. Lila hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "The heart of the forest," she said finally. "It is their source of power. But to reach it..." Another spirit lunged at her, and she struck it down with a powerful blow of her tail. "To reach it, we must go deeper into the forest." Ethan felt a surge of dread. The deeper parts of the forest were forbidden, a place even the most seasoned hunters feared to tread. But there was no other choice. "Lead the way," he said, his voice steady. Lila nodded, her form shimmering as she shifted back into her human guise. "Stay close," she said. The storm seemed to part as she moved, the spirits hesitating as though unsure whether to attack. Ethan followed her, his bow at the ready. The path ahead was dark and twisted, the trees forming unnatural shapes that loomed like silent sentinels. The whispers of the forest grew louder, a cacophony of voices that seemed to echo inside Ethan's mind. He shook his head, trying to focus, but the voices grew more insistent. "They will betray you," one voice hissed. "She is using you," another murmured. Ethan clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. He glanced at Lila, who moved with unwavering determination. Whatever the voices said, he trusted her. She had chosen to fight for him, to stand against the very forces that had created her. The ground beneath them grew softer, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The forest seemed to pulse with life, its energy growing stronger with every step. "We're close," Lila said, her voice barely audible. Ahead, the trees parted, revealing a massive clearing. At its center stood a colossal tree, its roots twisting and writhing like living things. The tree's bark glowed faintly, and its branches stretched high into the stormy sky. "The heart of the forest," Lila said, her voice tinged with awe and fear. Ethan stared at the tree, his heart pounding. It was beautiful and terrifying, a symbol of the forest's ancient power. Before they could move closer, the spirits reappeared, their forms coiling around the clearing. "You will not touch the heart," they screeched, their voices blending into a deafening roar. Ethan knocked another arrow, his eyes narrowing. "We'll see about that." Ethan and Lila stood side by side, their forms dwarfed by the colossal heart of the forest and the serpentine spirits encircling it. The air crackled with energy, and the storm's fury seemed to funnel into the clearing, centering on the massive tree and the two who dared challenge the gods. "Lila," Ethan whispered, his grip tightening on his bow. "How do we sever their connection to the heart?" Lila's gaze remained fixed on the glowing tree, her expression resolute yet laced with fear. "The heart is alive," she said. "It is the source of their power, but it is also bound to their will. If we destroy it," she hesitated, her voice faltering. "What happens if we destroy it?" Ethan asked, his voice firm. "It will weaken them," she admitted, "but it will also anger the gods beyond the forest. The balance of this land could collapse." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And if we don't?" "They will kill you," Lila said simply, her voice trembling. "And I will lose myself to their wrath." A low hiss rippled through the clearing as one of the spirits slithered closer. Its glowing eyes locked onto Ethan, and its voice echoed like thunder. "You cannot touch the heart, mortal," it snarled. "Its power is eternal, and you are nothing but dust beneath our will." "Dust or not," Ethan said, raising his bow, "I'm not going down without a fight." The spirit lunged, its massive form barreling toward him. Ethan released his arrow, the iron-tipped shaft striking the spirit's glowing body. It let out a terrible screech, writhing in agony before dissolving into mist. But as one spirit fell, two more emerged, their forms twisting and shifting as though they were born from the very air. "They are endless," Ethan muttered, his breath labored. "No," Lila said, stepping forward. "They are bound to the heart. If we destroy it, they will fall." Another spirit lunged at her, but Lila transformed in an instant, her serpent form striking with deadly precision. Her emerald scales shimmered in the dim light, her movements a blur as she fought off the attacking spirits. Ethan covered her, firing arrow after arrow. His aim was true, and the spirits fell one by one, their forms dissolving into mist. Yet, for every spirit they defeated, the circle around the heart grew tighter, the spirits coiling protectively around the glowing tree. "We have to get closer," Lila shouted, her voice carrying over the chaos. Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the clearing. The spirits were relentless, but their movements were predictable, their attacks driven by rage rather than strategy. He saw an opening, a narrow gap between two of the spirits. "Follow me," he called to Lila, sprinting toward the gap. Lila moved with him, her serpent form weaving through the chaos. The spirits lunged and hissed, but they were too slow to stop them. The two of them reached the base of the heart, its massive roots twisting and writhing like living things. The glow of the tree was almost blinding up close, and Ethan could feel its power radiating through the air, a pulse that seemed to sync with his own heartbeat. "What now?" Ethan asked, his voice urgent. Lila hesitated, her human form returning. Her eyes were wide, her expression conflicted. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never defied them before. The heart, it is ancient. Destroying it could." "Lila." Ethan interrupted, his voice sharp. "If we don't act now, we're dead." The spirits began to close in, their forms coiling tighter around the clearing. The air grew heavier, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Lila took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch the heart. The moment her fingers brushed the glowing bark, a surge of energy shot through her, and she cried out in pain. "Lila!" Ethan shouted, catching her as she staggered. "It's alive," she gasped, her voice weak. "It's fighting me." Ethan looked at the heart, his mind racing. He had no magic, no connection to the forest's power, but he had something the spirits didn't, the will to protect. He reached for his hunting knife, the blade gleaming with its iron edge. "What are you doing?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. "Ending this," Ethan said, determination hardening his voice. He plunged the knife into the heart's bark. The reaction was immediate. A deafening roar erupted from the tree, shaking the ground and sending a shockwave through the air. The spirits screamed, their forms writhing in agony as the heart's glow began to flicker. The roots of the tree lashed out, striking at Ethan like serpents. He dodged one, but another caught him, throwing him to the ground. "Ethan!" Lila cried, rushing to his side. "I'm fine," he grunted, pulling himself to his feet. "Keep them off me." Lila transformed again, her serpent form coiling protectively around him. She struck at the roots and spirits alike, her fangs gleaming as she fought with ferocity. Ethan drove the knife deeper into the heart, the bark splitting and cracking under the force. The glow dimmed further, and the spirits' screams grew louder, their forms flickering like dying flames. But the heart was not done. The ground beneath them erupted, and a massive root shot out, wrapping around Ethan's waist and lifting him into the air. "Ethan!" Lila screamed, her voice filled with terror. He struggled against the root, his knife still in his hand. With a final, desperate effort, he swung the blade, cutting through the root and falling to the ground. The heart let out a final, deafening roar, and the glow disappeared entirely. The spirits let out one last, anguished screech before dissolving into mist, their forms vanishing into the storm. Silence fell over the clearing. The storm subsided, and the air grew still. Ethan lay on the ground, his body bruised and battered. Lila rushed to his side, her human form returning as she knelt beside him. "You did it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and relief. Ethan looked at her, his face pale but determined. "We did it." But as the forest grew quiet, a new sound emerged, a low, rumbling voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You dare defy the gods," the voice boomed, shaking the very earth. Ethan and Lila looked at each other, their relief replaced by dread. The forest had been quieted, but the wrath of the gods was only beginning. The clearing that had just been filled with the chaotic energy of battle now felt ominously still, but Ethan and Lila could feel the tension rising in the air. The low, rumbling voice echoed again, growing louder and more menacing. "You dare desecrate the sacred heart of the forest," it boomed, shaking the ground beneath them. Ethan staggered to his feet, clutching his side where a root had struck him. Lila's hands trembled as she gripped his arm, her human form shimmering faintly as though her serpent nature threatened to take over once more. "We didn't have a choice." Lila shouted into the void, her voice steady despite her fear. "The spirits left us no other path. We had to protect ourselves." A cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it whispers of disdain and anger. Shadows began to gather, pooling together into the forms of towering figures with eyes that burned like embers. These were no mere spirits, they were the gods themselves, the ancient rulers of the forest. Ethan tightened his grip on his hunting knife, though the blade seemed pitifully small against the towering deities. One of the gods, a figure with antlers sprouting from its head and skin like cracked bark, stepped forward. Its voice was deep and resonant, echoing with the weight of centuries. "Mortal," it said, its gaze fixed on Ethan. "You, who have spilled blood upon our sacred grounds and defied our will, have brought this upon yourself." Ethan met the god's gaze, his heart pounding. "I didn't know your forest was sacred," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gripping him. "I only hunted to feed my people. And when I found Lila, I saved her because it was the right thing to do." "You speak of righteousness," another god hissed, its form a swirling mass of smoke and shadow. "Yet your actions reek of arrogance. You dare take what is not yours, then destroy what you cannot comprehend." Lila stepped forward, placing herself between Ethan and the gods. "He didn't know," she said, her voice pleading. "And I failed you. But Ethan's heart is pure. He is not the enemy you believe him to be." The gods turned their burning eyes to her, their expressions unreadable. "You, serpent," the antlered god said, its voice heavy with disdain. "You were our creation, our weapon. Yet you have betrayed us. Why should we not destroy you both where you stand?" Lila straightened, her green eyes glowing with defiance. "Because I chose to protect him. Because I saw in him a goodness that your wrath blinded you to." She gestured to the heart, now dark and lifeless. "This was not just a symbol of your power, It was a chain, binding the spirits to your anger. You were using them, and now they are free. The gods murmured among themselves, their voices blending into a haunting melody of wind and thunder. Ethan stepped forward, his knife still in hand. "If you're going to judge us, judge me," he said. "I was the one who struck the heart. Leave Lila out of this." Lila turned to him, her eyes wide with shock. "Ethan, no." But he held up a hand, silencing her. "I don't regret saving her," he continued, addressing the gods. "And I don't regret protecting my home. If that means I have to face your wrath, so be it." The gods fell silent, their burning eyes fixed on the hunter. Finally, the antlered god spoke. "You are bold, mortal. Foolishly so." Another god, its form shimmering like water, stepped forward. "But there is truth in your words. You acted not out of malice, but ignorance. And you," it said, turning to Lila, "you chose to defy us for a cause greater than yourself." The gods' forms began to shift, their towering figures becoming less menacing, though their presence remained overwhelming. The antlered god raised a hand, and the ground beneath Ethan and Lila stopped trembling. "For your defiance, there will be consequences," it said. "But for your courage and your love, there is also mercy." Ethan exchanged a glance with Lila, hope flickering in his eyes. "What kind of consequences?" he asked cautiously. The water-like god stepped forward. "The heart of the forest was a balance between the mortal world and ours. Without it, that balance is broken. You must restore it." Ethan frowned. "Restore it? How?" The gods began to fade, their forms dissolving into the mist. The antlered god's voice echoed one last time. "Seek the grove of eternity, where the roots of the forest are deepest. There, you will find the means to restore what you have destroyed. But beware, the journey will test you in ways you cannot imagine." As the gods vanished, the clearing grew silent once more. The storm had passed, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Ethan and Lila stood alone, the weight of the gods' words settling over them like a heavy shroud. "The grove of eternity," Lila said softly, her voice tinged with both wonder and dread. "It's a place no one has ever returned from." Ethan took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. "Then we'll be the first." Lila looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "Ethan, are you sure about this?" He met her gaze, his expression determined. "I don't know what lies ahead," he admitted. "But I do know one thing, we're in this together." Lila smiled faintly, though her eyes shimmered with uncertainty. "Together," she echoed. And with that, they turned toward the heart of the forest, where their greatest challenge, and their greatest test, awaited. The forest loomed darker than ever as Ethan and Lila ventured deeper into its ancient heart. The trees grew taller and thicker, their twisted branches forming an almost impenetrable canopy that blocked out the sky. The air was heavy, carrying the faint scent of moss and decay. Each step felt as though they were walking into the very soul of the forest, a place alive with memories of old gods and forgotten whispers. "Do you know the way to this grove of eternity?" Ethan asked, his voice low as if afraid to disturb the eerie silence. Lila walked beside him, her serpent instincts heightened, her eyes darting around for signs of danger. "I've heard of it in legends," she admitted. "The elders of the forest spirits spoke of it as the birthplace of life in this land. It's said to be guarded by creatures that were ancient before even the gods took form." Ethan tightened his grip on his bow. "Sounds like we're heading straight into danger." "We are," Lila said, glancing at him. "But it's the only way. The gods didn't leave us a choice." As they pushed forward, the forest seemed to shift around them. Paths that appeared clear one moment vanished the next, replaced by walls of trees and tangled roots. Strange sounds echoed through the air, the rustle of leaves with no wind, the faint cry of an unseen creature, and whispers that seemed to come from the shadows themselves. "Stay close," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the unease crawling up his spine. "I'm not leaving your side," Lila replied, her voice soft but firm. They continued in silence, their senses on high alert. Hours passed, though it felt like days. The light grew dimmer until it was nearly impossible to see. Just as Ethan was about to suggest setting up camp, they stumbled into a clearing unlike any they had seen before. The ground was covered in blackened soil, and the trees surrounding the clearing were twisted and dead, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. In the center stood a stone archway, carved with symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. "This must be it," Lila said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The gate to the deeper forest." Ethan approached the archway cautiously, his bow ready. "It looks old. Ancient, even." "It is," Lila said, stepping closer. "This marks the boundary between the forest we know and the forest no one has returned from. Once we cross this, there's no turning back." Ethan looked at her, his expression serious. "Are you sure about this, Lila? If there's a chance we can find another way." "There isn't," Lila said firmly. "The gods made that clear. If we don't restore the heart, the forest will never forgive us. And neither will they." Ethan nodded, his resolve solidifying. "Then we go together." Lila reached out and touched the archway. The moment her fingers brushed the stone, the glowing symbols flared brightly, and the air around them shimmered. A low hum filled the clearing, growing louder until it was almost deafening. Ethan shielded his eyes as the archway began to pulse with light. Then, as suddenly as it started, the light disappeared, leaving behind a swirling portal of green and gold energy. "Ready?" Lila asked, her voice steady despite the tension in her eyes. "Ready," Ethan replied, though his heart pounded in his chest. They stepped through the portal together. The world beyond the portal was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. The air was thick and humid, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and rotting vegetation. The ground pulsed faintly beneath their feet, as though the forest itself was alive and breathing. Massive trees with glowing leaves towered above them, their branches intertwining to form a canopy of light. Strange plants with luminescent blossoms lined the path, and in the distance, the faint sound of rushing water echoed through the forest. "This place," Ethan began, his voice trailing off as he took in the surreal landscape. "It's alive," Lila said, her voice tinged with awe. "Every part of it. The plants, the air, the earth, everything here is connected to the grove of eternity." Ethan crouched to examine one of the glowing plants. Its petals shimmered like starlight, and when he touched it, the flower emitted a soft hum, as though responding to his presence. "It's beautiful," he said, standing up. "Don't be fooled," Lila warned. "Beauty often hides danger, especially in a place like this." As if on cue, the forest seemed to stir. The ground beneath them shifted, and the trees groaned as their branches swayed unnaturally. A low growl echoed through the air, sending a shiver down Ethan's spine. "Something's watching us," he said, his voice low. Lila nodded, her eyes scanning the trees. "Stay close," she said, her hand brushing against his arm. The growl grew louder, and shadows began to move among the trees. Ethan raised his bow, his eyes darting around for the source of the sound. Lila shifted slightly, her serpent form shimmering beneath her human guise. Then, from the shadows, a creature emerged. It was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, a massive beast with the body of a panther and the wings of a bat. Its eyes glowed a fiery red, and its claws gleamed like polished obsidian. It let out a deafening roar, bearing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "What is that?" Ethan asked, his voice tense. "A guardian," Lila said, her voice barely audible. "The first of many." The creature lunged, its massive form barreling toward them with terrifying speed. Ethan fired an arrow, but the beast swatted it aside as though it were nothing. "Run!" Lila shouted, grabbing Ethan's arm and pulling him back. They sprinted through the forest, the guardian hot on their heels. The ground seemed to shift and twist beneath their feet, as though the forest itself was trying to slow them down. "We can't keep running forever," Ethan shouted, glancing over his shoulder at the pursuing beast. Lila's eyes flashed. "Then we stand and fight." Ethan skidded to a stop, turning to face the creature. Lila stepped beside him, her serpent form shimmering into existence. The guardian roared again, its wings spreading wide as it prepared to strike. Ethan raised his bow, his hand steady despite the fear coursing through him. Ready when you are, he said. Lila nodded, her serpent eyes glowing with determination. The battle for survival had only just begun. The Guardian's roar sent waves of energy rippling through the dense forest. The beast's fiery eyes burned with intent, and its sleek, panther-like body crouched low, muscles coiled like springs ready to unleash devastation. Ethan and Lila stood their ground, facing the enormous creature. The glowing plants around them dimmed, as if cowering in the Guardian's presence. Lila's voice was steady but urgent. Ethan, this is no ordinary beast. It's connected to the forest itself. We can't defeat it with brute force. Ethan glanced at her, sweat beading on his forehead. Then what do we do? The Guardian lunged before she could answer, its claws slicing through the air like blades. Ethan dove to the side, rolling to his feet just in time to see Lila shift partially into her serpent form. Her shimmering green tail whipped around, striking the beast with a force that sent it skidding back. The creature snarled, shaking off the impact as if it had been nothing. Lila looked at Ethan. It's testing us. The gods won't let us pass unless we prove ourselves. Testing us how? Ethan asked, stringing another arrow to his bow. Courage. Unity. Balance, Lila said, her voice calm despite the chaos. That's what the Grove of Eternity stands for. We need to show the forest we possess these qualities, or it will destroy us. The Guardian roared again, charging toward them. Ethan reacted instinctively, loosing his arrow. The projectile struck the beast in the shoulder, but instead of wounding it, the arrow dissolved into sparks of light. The creature barely slowed. Lila. Ethan shouted as he dodged another swipe of the Guardian's claws. Lila sprang forward, her serpent tail coiling around the creature's hind legs. The Guardian thrashed violently, its wings flapping with enough force to send gusts of wind through the clearing. Ethan, listen. Lila called out, her voice strained as she struggled to hold the beast. You need to connect with the forest. Use its energy, not your weapons. Ethan hesitated, confusion flickering across his face. How do I do that? Trust your instincts, Lila said. The forest is alive, it will guide you if you let it. The Guardian snarled, breaking free of Lila's hold and spinning toward Ethan. Its glowing eyes bore into him, and for a moment, he felt as if the creature was staring directly into his soul. Ethan took a deep breath, lowering his bow. He could feel the forest around him, the pulsing ground beneath his feet, the faint hum of the glowing plants, the rhythmic rustle of the trees. Closing his eyes, he focused on the energy surrounding him, letting it flow through him like a river. When he opened his eyes, the Guardian had paused, its head tilted as if in curiosity. Ethan stepped forward cautiously, holding his hands out. We're not here to harm you, he said, his voice steady. We only seek to restore what was broken. The Guardian growled low, its fiery eyes narrowing. Lila joined him, her serpent form shimmering as she returned to her human guise. Ethan's right, she said. We're not your enemies. The gods sent us here because they believed we could succeed. Let us prove it. For a long moment, the Guardian remained still, its gaze shifting between the two of them. Then, with a sound like a deep rumble of thunder, it reared back on its hind legs and let out a deafening roar. Ethan braced himself, expecting the creature to attack, but instead, the roar dissolved into a wave of golden light. The energy washed over them, warm and soothing, and the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The Guardian lowered itself to the ground, its glowing eyes dimming. It regarded Ethan and Lila with what almost seemed like approval before stepping aside, revealing a narrow path leading deeper into the forest. Ethan exhaled, his legs shaking from the tension. Did we pass? Lila nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. The Guardian has accepted us. The forest sees our intentions. Ethan looked at the path ahead, his resolve strengthening. Then we keep moving. Lila placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle. We'll face more trials, she said. But I believe in us. Ethan met her gaze, a flicker of warmth in his eyes. Together, he said. Together, Lila echoed. They stepped onto the path, leaving the clearing and the Guardian behind. The forest seemed to shift again, the glowing trees growing brighter as if lighting their way. But in the distance, faint growls and whispers hinted at the challenges still to come. The deeper they ventured, the more surreal the forest became. The path twisted and turned, bordered by plants that shimmered with an otherworldly light. Strange sounds echoed through the air, soft whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Ethan paused, glancing around. "Do you hear that?" Lila nodded, her eyes scanning the shadows. "The forest is speaking to us." "What's it saying?" Ethan asked, his voice hushed. Lila frowned, her expression thoughtful. "It's testing our minds now. The whispers will try to confuse us, to turn us against each other. We need to stay focused." Ethan nodded, though unease prickled at the back of his mind. The whispers grew louder, forming words he could almost understand. "Why do you trust her?" one voice hissed, cold and venomous. "She's a snake," another said, the words sharp like a blade. "She'll betray you." Ethan shook his head, trying to block out the voices. "Lila, do you hear?" "I hear them," Lila said quickly, cutting him off. "Don't listen to them, Ethan. They're trying to plant doubt in your mind." Ethan clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "Why would they do that?" "Because doubt weakens us," Lila said. "And if we falter, the forest will claim us." Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. "I trust you, Lila. No matter what the whispers say." Lila smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "And I trust you, Ethan." As they walked on, the whispers grew more insistent, their voices blending into a cacophony of doubt and fear. But Ethan and Lila held firm, their bond unshaken. Ahead, the path widened, revealing another challenge that awaited them, a river of liquid light, its surface shimmering with strange energy. "What now?" Ethan asked, his voice low. Lila stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the river. "Another test," she said. "But we'll face it together." The journey was far from over. The river stretched wide before them, glowing like molten gold under the dark canopy of the forest. Its surface shimmered with patterns that seemed to shift and dance, reflecting fragments of images, some familiar, others strange and unnerving. Ethan stepped closer, the warmth of the glowing water brushing against his skin like a living thing. "What is this place?" Lila crouched near the edge, her hand hovering over the surface without touching it. "This is no ordinary river. It's alive with the energy of the grove." She glanced at Ethan, her voice steady but solemn. "The river tests the soul. If you're unworthy, it will swallow you whole." Ethan frowned. "What does it mean by unworthy? Haven't we already proved ourselves to the Guardian?" "The Guardian tested our courage," Lila explained. "This river will test our truth, our honesty with ourselves and each other. If we hide anything, if we deny who we are, the river will know." Ethan's heart thudded heavily. He stared at the shimmering water, unease curling in his chest. "So, we just walk in and hope it doesn't destroy us?" Lila nodded, her expression grave. "It's the only way forward. But remember, Ethan, the river sees everything. It will show us things we may not want to face." Ethan hesitated, then straightened his shoulders. "We don't have a choice. Let's do this." Lila smiled faintly, a glimmer of pride in her eyes. Together, then. They stepped into the river, and the world shifted. The instant their feet touched the glowing water, the air around them grew heavy. The river wasn't deep, barely reaching their knees, but it felt as though they were wading through thick, invisible currents. Ethan glanced down and gasped. The water beneath him was no longer golden, instead, it reflected a vivid scene from his past. He saw himself as a boy, sitting by the riverbank outside his village. His father stood behind him, teaching him how to string a bow. Ethan remembered the moment clearly. It was the first time he had truly felt a connection to the forest, to the hunt. But as the scene shifted, he saw something else. A wounded gazelle lay before him, its eyes wide with fear. Ethan, barely a teenager, raised his bow, but he hesitated. His father's voice echoed, "A true hunter doesn't let mercy cloud his aim." Take the shot. In the reflection, Ethan watched himself lower the bow and let the gazelle escape. His father's disappointment had been crushing, and Ethan had carried that moment of failure with him ever since. Ethan, Lila's voice broke through his thoughts. What do you see? He hesitated, the shame of that moment still raw. A mistake, he said finally. A time I wasn't strong enough to do what was expected of me. Lila turned to him, her own reflection shimmering in the water. Her serpent form flickered alongside her human image, a haunting reminder of what she truly was. The river doesn't show mistakes, Ethan. It shows truths. What you see isn't failure, it's your compassion. Ethan frowned, the weight in his chest easing slightly. Compassion. Yes, Lila said, her voice gentle. It's why you saved me, even when you didn't know what I was. It's what makes you who you are. Ethan looked at her, gratitude shining in his eyes. Thank you, Lila. Her smile faltered as her gaze shifted back to the river. In its surface, she saw herself standing before the forest deities. Their voices boomed around her, commanding her to take Ethan's life. She watched as her serpent form wrapped around him, ready to strike. But in the reflection, she hesitated, her fangs retracting as tears streamed down her face. The scene shifted again, this time showing her mother, a serpent spirit who had once defied the gods and paid the price with her life. Lila's heart clenched. Lila, Ethan's voice brought her back. What do you see? She hesitated, the weight of her secrets pressing down on her. I see, my purpose. What I was meant to do. And the choice I made to defy it. Ethan reached out, his hand brushing against hers. Whatever your purpose was, it doesn't define who you are now. Tears welled in Lila's eyes, but she nodded. I hope you're right. The river's glow brightened, and the currents around them grew calmer. The reflections faded, leaving only the golden light once more. You've passed, a voice echoed around them, deep and resonant. Ethan and Lila turned, but no one was there. The voice continued, carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. You have faced your truths and accepted them. You may proceed. The river's glow intensified, forming a bridge of light that led to the other side. Ethan and Lila stepped forward, their hearts lighter yet burdened with the knowledge of what they had seen. As they left the river behind, the forest around them seemed to shift again. The trees grew taller, their trunks twisting like spirals. The air was filled with a soft hum, as though the forest itself was singing. Ethan glanced at Lila. That river, it was more than just a test, wasn't it? Lila nodded, her expression thoughtful. It was the forest's way of reminding us who we are. Of preparing us for what's to come. What do you think is next? Ethan asked. Lila hesitated, her eyes scanning the path ahead. Something tells me the hardest trials are yet to come. Ethan nodded, his resolve steady. Then we'll face them together, no matter what. As they walked on, a soft breeze swept through the forest, carrying with it whispers that spoke of power, betrayal, and destiny. The journey was far from over, and the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on their shoulders. The forest grew darker as Ethan and Lila pressed forward, the golden glow of the river now a distant memory. Shadows thickened like living entities, swirling around them in silent whispers. The hum of the forest became low and haunting, resonating in their bones. Ethan tightened his grip on his bow, his instincts warning him of unseen dangers. Lila, this place feels wrong. Lila paused, her serpent senses heightened. She could feel the weight of the shadows pressing in, testing the limits of her resolve. It's the veil of shadows, she said softly. A realm between light and dark. The gods use it to trap those who falter. So, it's a trap? Ethan asked, glancing around warily. It's more than that, Lila replied. It's a mirror of fear. If we're not careful, it will consume us. As they ventured deeper, the shadows began to shift, forming shapes that danced and flickered like fleeting memories. Ethan stopped abruptly as one of the figures solidified, a man with a familiar face, tall and strong, his eyes burning with disapproval. Father. Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. The shadow spoke, its tone laced with disdain. You are not the hunter I raised you to be. You are weak, boy. A disgrace to our bloodline. Ethan's chest tightened. No. I've done everything you taught me. I've protected the village, provided for our people. The shadow laughed coldly, cutting him off. And yet, you falter. You show mercy where there should be none. You trust where there is only deceit. Ethan turned to Lila, his eyes searching hers for reassurance. Is this real? She shook her head, stepping closer. It's not your father, Ethan. It's the veil feeding on your doubts. But the shadow grew taller, its presence more imposing. You think this snake will save you, it sneered, gesturing toward Lila. She will be your undoing. Ethan clenched his fists, his knuckles white. The words cut deep, but he forced himself to breathe. You're not my father, he said firmly. And you don't know her like I do. The shadow paused, flickering as if uncertain. Lila reached for Ethan's arm. You're stronger than this. Remember who you are. Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. You're wrong, he said to the shadow. Compassion doesn't make me weak. It makes me human. With those words, the shadow dissolved into mist, its laughter fading into the void. Before Ethan could catch his breath, the shadows swirled again, this time coalescing around Lila. She froze as a dark figure emerged, a towering serpent, its scales glistening like obsidian and its eyes glowing a fiery red. Daughter, the serpent hissed, its voice both seductive and menacing. Lila's heart raced. Mother. Ethan stared in shock. Your mother. The serpent circled her, its presence suffocating. You have strayed far from your path, it said. The gods gave you a mission, and you have failed them. I didn't fail, Lila said, her voice trembling. I chose another way. You chose weakness, the serpent spat, baring its fangs. You let your heart betray you. Do you think this human will save you from the gods' wrath? Lila's gaze dropped, shame flickering in her eyes. Ethan stepped forward, his voice firm. She doesn't need saving. She made her choice because she has a heart. That's more than I can say for you. The serpent turned its fiery eyes on Ethan, a hiss escaping its throat. Foolish mortal. You think her love for you is pure? She was sent to kill you. You are nothing but her prey. Ethan flinched, the weight of the words sinking in. Is that true? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lila looked at him, tears streaming down her face. It was true, she admitted. But not anymore. Ethan, The serpent lunged at her, cutting her off. Enough, it roared. You are no daughter of mine. You are nothing but a traitor to your kind. Lila shifted into her serpent form, her emerald scales shimmering defiantly. If defying you means protecting him, then so be it. The two serpents clashed, their coils thrashing as they fought. Ethan watched, his heart pounding as he realized just how far Lila was willing to go for him. The battle between Lila and her mother raged on, the shadows around them quivering with each strike. Ethan knew he couldn't just stand by, but his arrows were useless against the supernatural forces at play. He closed his eyes, recalling the river's lesson. The forest is alive. Its energy flows through everything. Kneeling, Ethan pressed his palms to the ground, focusing on the hum of the forest. Help me, he whispered. Show me how to save her. The earth beneath him responded, a surge of warmth spreading through his body. When he opened his eyes, the shadows seemed less oppressive, their edges blurring as light began to seep through. Ethan rose, his voice steady and commanding. Enough. The veil of shadows shuddered, its grip loosening as light poured in. The serpent mother hissed, recoiling from the brightness. You dare defy the gods, she spat, her form dissolving into the retreating shadows. Lila shifted back to her human form, collapsing to her knees. Ethan rushed to her side, helping her up. You didn't have to fight her alone, he said softly. Lila looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and pain. I thought I'd lost you. You'll never lose me, Ethan said firmly. We're in this together. The veil finally broke, the shadows retreating fully to reveal a path bathed in golden light. The forest had acknowledged their unity, granting them passage once more. But as they stepped forward, the wind carried a warning: the gods were watching, and their judgment would not be so easily swayed. The golden light ahead seemed inviting, but Ethan and Lila knew better than to trust appearances. The forest, though beautiful in its glow, carried an air of unease. Every step felt heavier, as though unseen eyes were watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "We're getting closer," Lila whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustle of leaves. Ethan adjusted the bough slung across his shoulder. "Closer to what?" "To the grove of eternal spirits," she replied. "It's where the gods' power is strongest. If they want to end us, they'll do it there." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then we'll be ready." The path ahead narrowed, framed by trees whose branches twisted into strange, almost humanoid shapes. Lila shivered, the forest's energy prickling against her skin. As they continued, a figure stepped out from the shadows, blocking their path. It was an elderly man, his skin weathered like the bark of ancient trees. He leaned on a staff adorned with feathers and bones, his eyes glowing faintly. "Turn back," the man said, his voice resonating like the wind through hollow reeds. Ethan instinctively raised his bow, but Lila placed a hand on his arm. "Wait," she said. The old man's gaze shifted to her, his expression unreadable. "You tread on sacred ground, serpent child. Do you know what you've unleashed?" "I know," Lila replied, her voice steady. "But we've come this far. We won't turn back now." The men studied her, then Ethan. "And you, hunter? Do you understand the price of your defiance? The god's wrath is not easily quelled." Ethan stepped forward, meeting the man's gaze. "I don't care about their wrath. I care about doing what's right." The old man's eyes narrowed. "Very well. But the path ahead is not for the faint of heart. The grove will test you both, body and soul. Fail, and you will perish." With a wave of his staff, the old man vanished, leaving behind an eerie silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating their next move. The path suddenly split into multiple directions, each one winding and indistinguishable from the others. The golden light dimmed, replaced by an oppressive gray haze. "It's a maze," Ethan said, scanning the paths. Lila nodded. "A living labyrinth. The forest shifts and rearranges itself to confuse intruders." "How do we find the right path?" Ethan asked. Lila closed her eyes, focusing on the energy around her. She could feel the labyrinth's pulse, a rhythmic beat that seemed to echo from deep within. "We don't follow the paths," she said finally. "We follow the heart of the forest." Ethan frowned. "The heart? It's a feeling," Lila explained. "The forest speaks in whispers, in the pull of its energy. Trust me." He nodded, placing his faith in her. Together, they stepped off the path and into the dense undergrowth. The forest resisted them at first, branches clawing at their clothes and roots tangling around their feet. But as they pressed on, the resistance eased, and the air grew warmer. "Keep going," Lila urged, her voice filled with determination. The ground beneath them began to shift, the labyrinth reacting to their progress. The trees twisted and bent, their trunks forming archways that seemed to lead nowhere. Strange, ghostly figures flitted between the shadows, their laughter echoing faintly. "Don't look at them," Lila warned as one of the figures drifted close. Ethan kept his eyes forward, though the presence of the spirits made his skin crawl. "What are they?" "Lost souls," Lila said. "Those who failed the trials and were consumed by the forest." The thought sent a shiver down Ethan's spine, but he pushed it aside. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a clearing. At its center stood a massive tree, its trunk hollow and glowing faintly from within. The air around it hummed with energy, vibrating in Ethan's chest. "This is it," Lila said, her voice reverent. "The entrance to the grove." Ethan stepped closer, marveling at the tree's size. Its roots stretched out like veins, pulsing with golden light. The hollow opening seemed to beckon them, though an invisible force kept them at bay. "How do we get in?" Ethan asked. Before Lila could answer, the tree spoke. Its voice was deep and resonant, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Only those who are pure of heart may enter, it said. Prove your worth, or be cast out. Ethan and Lila exchanged a glance. What now? Ethan asked. We prove ourselves, Lila replied, stepping forward. The tree's light intensified, surrounding them in a blinding glow. The world around them faded, replaced by an endless void of golden mist. Ethan reached for Lila's hand, but she was gone. He was alone. The void shifted, and a voice echoed in his mind. Hunter, you have been chosen to protect, yet you bring destruction. Can you face the truth of your actions? Images flashed before him, animals he had hunted, forests he had tread upon without care. He saw the moment he had unknowingly violated the sacred grove, his arrow striking a tree whose roots bled golden sap. I didn't know, Ethan said, his voice breaking. Ignorance is no excuse, the voice replied. What will you do to atone? Ethan's heart ached as he realized the weight of his actions. I'll protect it, he said. I'll protect the forest, the life within it. I swear it. The golden mist swirled, and the voice fell silent. Elsewhere in the void, Lila faced her own trial. She stood before the deities themselves, their forms towering and radiant. You have defied us, they said, their voices unified. You were created to serve, yet you chose rebellion. Why? Lila met their gaze, her fear replaced by resolve. Because I found something worth fighting for. Someone worth saving. The deity's eyes burned with fury. You betray your kind for a mortal. He is weak. He is nothing. He is everything, Lila said, her voice steady. His kindness, his strength, it showed me what I could be. I'm more than a weapon. I'm more than your pawn. The deities loomed closer, their power suffocating. If you defy us, you will suffer the consequences. Do you accept this fate? Lila stood tall, her serpent form shimmering with emerald light. I accept it. The deities roared, their voices shaking the void. The trials were far from over, but Ethan and Lila's resolve had been tested and strengthened. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear, together, they would face whatever the gods threw their way. When the golden mist dissipated, Ethan and Lila found themselves standing side by side at the base of the massive tree. Its hollow glowed brighter now, as though it acknowledged their passage through the trials. Ethan glanced at Lila, relief washing over him. Are you all right? Lila nodded, though her face was pale. They know I've chosen you over them. We've angered them, Ethan. They won't let us go so easily. The ground trembled, and the tree's voice resonated once more. Your trials have not gone unnoticed. But the gods demand their due. Enter the grove and face your judgment. Ethan held Lila's hand tightly as they stepped into the hollow of the tree. The grove of eternal spirits was breathtaking. Giant trees with glowing leaves stretched high into the sky, their light reflecting in the crystal-clear water of a central lake. The air was filled with a melodic hum, and glowing orbs floated gently around them. But the beauty of the place was overshadowed by the presence of the deities. They appeared as towering figures of light and shadow, their faces both beautiful and terrifying. Their eyes burned with intensity, locking onto Ethan and Lila. You have defied us, one deity said, their voice like thunder. Hunter, you tread upon our sacred grounds and spilled the lifeblood of the forest. Another deity turned to Lila. And you, serpent child, betrayed your purpose. You were sent to punish this mortal, yet you chose love over duty. Lila stepped forward, her voice steady despite the god's wrath. I chose love because it is stronger than vengeance. Ethan has shown me that even mortals, flawed as they are, can have goodness in their hearts. Ethan added, I didn't know I had violated your sacred grounds, but now I do, and I regret it. I'll spend my life protecting this forest if you give me the chance. The god's presence grew more imposing, their power pressing down on the pair. Words are easy. Action proves intent. You must both offer something in return for your defiance. Lila's heart sank. What must we give? The deities responded as one, their voices shaking the grove. The serpent must surrender her immortality, and the hunter must bind his life to the forest. Should he harm it again, his soul will be lost forever. Ethan looked at Lila, his heart aching. "Are you sure about this?" Lila nodded. "A mortal life with you is better than an immortal life without love." Ethan turned to the gods. "I accept. Whatever it takes to protect this place and her." The deities raised their hands, their power washing over the pair in waves of light. Lila felt her serpent form dissolve, her spirit becoming fully human. Ethan felt a strange connection to the forest take root within him, its energy now pulsing in time with his heartbeat. When the light faded, the gods' forms shimmered and began to dissolve. "Your choices have been made," they said. "Go now, and honor them. But beware, betrayal will not be forgiven." The grove's glow softened, and the air grew still. Ethan and Lila stood together, the weight of their sacrifice settling in. "It's over," Ethan said, his voice quiet. Lila smiled faintly. "Not over, just beginning." Hand in hand, they left the grove, stepping back into the forest. Though the god's presence had faded, the connection between Ethan and the forest remained strong. He could feel its pulse, its life intertwining with his own. As they walked back toward the village, Ethan turned to Lila. "Thank you. For everything." "No," she said, her smile growing. "Thank you for saving me. In more ways than one." The story of Ethan and Lila teaches us about love, sacrifice, and the balance between humanity and nature. Now, dear viewers, we want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Lila's place? Would you choose love, even at the cost of immortality, or fulfill the duty assigned to you? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an African folktale adventure. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.